Texas, 1872. The endless sky stretched over the fledgling town of Stillwater like a promise yet to be fulfilled. Below it, the dusty main street buzzed with the usual Saturday commerce, wagons creaking, spurs jingling, and townsfolk bartering over the prices of flour and ammunition. 20-year-old Vivian Zimmerman clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest, her golden hair carefully pinned beneath a modest bonnet as she navigated between the merchant stalls. Her emerald-green calico dress, sewn by her own hand, swished around her ankles while she moved with purpose toward the small clapboard building that served as both post office and telegraph station. 3 months in Stillwater had taught Vivian one undeniable truth. A young woman without family in the West was like a lone flower in the desert, subject to constant attention, some welcome, some decidedly not. Miss Zimmerman, the booming voice of Chester Hollingsworth, the town's most prosperous cattle baron, cut through the morning bustle. What a delightful coincidence finding you out and about. Vivian forced a pleasant smile, knowing full well there was nothing coincidental about it. Chester had made it his business to know her schedule since the day she'd arrived to take up her position as the town's new schoolteacher. Mr. Hollingsworth, she nodded politely, hoping her acknowledgement would satisfy him. It did not. The 40-year-old man fell into step beside her, his expensive boots kicking up small clouds of dust. I was hoping you might reconsider my invitation to Sunday dinner tomorrow. My cook prepares a roast that would rival anything you might have had back east. That is very kind, Mr. Hollingsworth, but as I explained, Sunday afternoons are when I prepare my lessons for the coming week. Surely the children could survive one day with less preparation, he pressed, reaching to take her elbow. Vivian sidestepped the gesture smoothly. Every day of education matters, sir. If you will excuse me, I have correspondence to attend to. She quickened her pace, leaving Chester frowning in the street. It wasn't just Chester. In her short time in Stillwater, Vivian had deflected the attentions of the town banker, 2 shopkeepers, and nearly every unmarried rancher within 20 miles. Even the widowers with children had begun to call, ostensibly to discuss their offspring's education. Vivian had not come west to find a husband. She had come to escape the suffocating expectations of her aunt's Philadelphia home, where her only future lay in an arranged marriage to a man who saw her primarily as a means to combine family fortunes. The West represented freedom, the chance to forge her own path, to teach children eager for knowledge, to build something that belonged to her alone. The bell above the post office door jingled as Vivian entered. The postmaster, elderly Mr. Jenkins, looked up and smiled. "Morning, Miss Zimmerman. Got that package you've been waiting for." He reached beneath the counter and produced a paper-wrapped parcel. "Books again, I reckon." "Yes, Mr. Jenkins. The new geography texts I ordered from Chicago." "Heavy reading for little ones," he commented, sliding the package across the counter. "The world is expanding, Mr. Jenkins. Our children should expand with it." Vivian paid for the package and was turning to leave when the door swung open again. The man who entered removed his hat immediately, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. Dust covered his simple clothes, denims, boots, and a blue cotton shirt, but there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested dignity rather than weariness. His face, though tanned by the sun, retained a youthfulness that placed him in his mid-twenties, and his jawline held just a shadow of stubble that appeared more from days on the trail than stylistic choice. "Pardon me," he said, stepping aside to let Vivian pass. She nodded her thanks, noting his clear blue eyes and the way they met hers directly, without the usual appraising glance that most men gave her. "Mr. Jenkins," the stranger continued, approaching the counter, "Matthew Faulkner. I believe you're holding some mail for the Cross Creek outfit." "Faulkner, you must be old Jim's nephew," Jenkins said, rummaging through a stack of letters. "Heard you were coming to help out since his accident." "Yes, sir. Came as soon as I got word." Vivian lingered by the door, her curiosity piqued. Cross Creek Ranch lay about 5 miles outside of town. Jim Faulkner was an elderly rancher whose name often came up in town council meetings, always respectfully, though he rarely attended himself. "How is Mr. Faulkner recovering?" she asked, unable to contain her concern for one of the few town elders who had shown genuine interest in the school's progress. Matthew Faulkner turned, seeming to truly notice her for the first time. "Slowly, ma'am. The doctor says he won't be back on a horse this season, but he's fighting the confinement like a wild mustang in a corral." "That sounds like Jim," Jenkins chuckled. "Miss Zimmerman here is our schoolteacher." Came all the way from Philadelphia to civilize our young'uns. Matthew's expression brightened. My uncle mentioned you in his letters, Miss Zimmerman, said you've brought some fresh thinking to Stillwater. I'm trying, Vivian admitted, though some find change more challenging than others. Change is like a rattlesnake, Matthew replied with a slight smile, frightening up close but best respected from a proper distance. The analogy surprised a laugh from Vivian. An interesting philosophy, Mr. Faulkner. Just an observation. Uncle Jim says you've been requesting books for a school library. He was hoping to contribute before his accident. That's very generous. The children have so little access to knowledge beyond their immediate surroundings. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. Knowledge is the one thing that weighs nothing in your saddlebags but carries you the farthest. He accepted the mail from Jenkins, tucking it into his shirt pocket. I should let you get on with your day, Miss Zimmerman. Perhaps I could call at the schoolhouse sometime, deliver those books Uncle Jim set aside. It was a perfectly reasonable request, devoid of the usual underlying intentions that colored most men's offers of assistance. That would be most appreciated, Mr. Faulkner. Monday afternoons after 4 o'clock generally find me there alone. Monday after 4 it is then. He placed his hat back on his head, tipped it slightly, and departed. Vivian watched him go, a curious feeling settling in her chest. It wasn't the flutter of attraction that novels described. She had experienced that before and dismissed it as irrelevant to her ambitions. This was something different, recognition. As if in the briefest of exchanges, Matthew Faulkner had seen past her golden hair and green eyes to something others in Stillwater routinely overlooked: her intelligence, her purpose. The feeling followed her home to the small cottage the town had provided with her teaching position. It stayed with her through dinner preparations, through her evening reading, and into her lesson planning. By Sunday morning, she had almost convinced herself she had imagined the entire interaction, projected depth onto a perfectly ordinary conversation with yet another young man who would eventually reveal himself to be no different from the rest. The West had taught Vivian another lesson quickly. Men here saw women as either decorations or necessities. A pretty wife showed prosperity, a capable wife ensured survival. Neither view left much room for a woman's thoughts or ambitions. The frontier is no place for a woman's dreams, her aunt had warned before Vivian left Philadelphia. Out there, you are either married or invisible. There is no in-between. Vivian had come west precisely to disprove this theory. Her teaching position offered respect without matrimony, purpose without submission. She intended to build a life on her own terms, creating a legacy through education rather than childbearing. Yet as she walked to church that Sunday morning, nodding politely to townsfolk along the way, Vivian couldn't help but notice how couples dominated the landscape of Stillwater society. Single women were anomalies, tolerated only until they found their proper place beside a husband. The church service did nothing to dispel this notion. Reverend Thompson's sermon focused on the biblical directive for wives to submit to their husbands, with pointed glances toward the unmarried women scattered throughout the congregation. The Lord created order in all things, the Reverend intoned. Just as the sun rises in the east, just as the rivers flow to the sea, so must a woman find her natural place under the guidance of a husband. Vivian kept her expression neutral, while her mind composed counter-arguments. The Lord had also created her brain, her capabilities, her desire to teach. Surely those gifts were not meant to be subordinated to whatever man happened to claim her hand. After the service, she declined 3 separate invitations to Sunday dinner, ignoring the disapproving murmurs that followed her solitary walk home. Stillwater might not understand her choices, but understanding was not what she sought. Independence was. Monday morning brought the usual challenges of teaching 30 children of varying ages and abilities in a single room. The older boys were restless, their eyes constantly drifting toward the windows and the open range beyond. The young girls giggled over secretly passed notes. The smallest children struggled with letters and numbers, requiring constant attention. By 4 o'clock, when the last student had been shooed out the door, Vivian's temples throbbed with the beginnings of a headache. She was erasing the chalkboard when she heard the approach of a horse outside. Matthew Faulkner's tall frame filled the schoolhouse doorway a moment later, his hat in one hand and a wooden crate in the other. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her. "I hope I haven't come at an inconvenient time." "Not at all," she assured him, setting aside the eraser. "Please come in." He entered, boots echoing on the plank floor as he approached her desk. Uncle Jim sends his regards, along with these. He set the crate down gently. Inside, Vivian could see at least a dozen books, their leather bindings worn but cared for. "This is incredibly generous," she said, lifting out the top volume, a collection of Shakespeare's works. "The children have so few opportunities for exposure to literature." Matthew smiled, and Vivian noticed a small scar at the corner of his mouth that curved upward with the expression. Uncle Jim believes in building the mind as much as building fences, says both keep civilization from falling apart. Your uncle sounds like a remarkable man. He is. Came out here with nothing but determination and a few books in his saddlebags, built Cross Creek from bare dirt into something that will outlast him. Matthew glanced around the schoolroom. He's been following your progress since you arrived. Says you remind him of his late wife. She taught school back in Virginia before the war. Vivian began arranging the books on the small shelf behind her desk. I didn't know that, Mr. Faulkner has been supportive of the school, but he rarely speaks of personal matters. The war took a lot from him, his wife, his son, his belief in certain institutions. But never his faith in learning. Matthew leaned against a student desk, his posture relaxed but respectful. He said you've been trying to extend the school term by 2 months. Yes, though the town council seems reluctant. Most families need their children for the spring planting and fall harvest. But you disagree. Vivian hesitated, unused to being asked her opinion so directly. I understand the practical concerns, but knowledge compounds like interest in a bank. Every additional month of schooling pays dividends throughout a child's life. Matthew nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's an economic argument, logical. Have you presented it that way to the council? I tried, but Vivian stopped, realizing the trap she'd nearly fallen into. Mr. Faulkner, are you testing my ability to defend my educational philosophies? His laugh was sudden and genuine. Not testing, Miss Zimmerman. Interested, there's a difference. He straightened from the desk. Uncle Jim asked me to invite you to dinner at Cross Creek this Saturday. He'd like to discuss your ideas for the school's future. No pressure, of course. The invitation surprised her. Jim Faulkner was respected throughout the county, his support potentially valuable in her ongoing battles with the town council. Yet caution tempered her enthusiasm. That's very kind, but I don't wish to impose on an invalid. Uncle Jim would be offended to be called an invalid, Matthew replied with a grin. But I understand your concern. I'd be happy to drive into town to collect you and return you home afterward, proper and respectable. Something in his tone, the lack of presumption, the simple statement of practical arrangements, made Vivian relax slightly. In that case, I accept. What time should I expect you? Would 3 o'clock give you enough time to finish your Saturday responsibilities? Yes, that would be fine. Matthew nodded, seemingly pleased. Uncle Jim will be delighted. He picked up his hat, turning it in his hands. He also asked me to inquire about something else. He understands you've been conducting evening classes for adults. Heat rose in Vivian's cheeks. Her evening literacy classes for the town's Mexican laborers and former slaves had been met with mixed reactions in Stillwater, 3 nights a week. It's not an official school function. Why not? The direct question caught her off guard. The town council doesn't believe it's appropriate. They feel my energies are better spent teaching children who belong to tax-paying families. Matthew's expression darkened slightly. And what do you believe? I believe literacy is a right, not a privilege, Vivian answered, lifting her chin. Every person who wishes to learn deserves the opportunity. For a long moment, Matthew studied her, his blue eyes intent. Then he nodded once decisively. Uncle Jim thought you might say something like that. He asked me to give you this as well. He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope, handing it to her. Don't open it now. Read it later when you're alone. Curiosity prickled along Vivian's spine, but she took the envelope and tucked it into her desk drawer. Please thank your uncle for his generosity. Both the books and his interest in the school are deeply appreciated. I'll tell him. Matthew settled his hat on his head. Saturday at 3 then. Saturday at 3, she confirmed. After he left, Vivian found herself staring at the closed door, trying to understand the strange sense of anticipation that had settled over her. It wasn't romantic, or at least she didn't think it was. Matthew Faulkner had shown no signs of the usual masculine interest. He hadn't complimented her appearance or attempted to touch her hand. He hadn't even engaged in the mild flirtation that most men considered obligatory when addressing an unmarried woman. Instead, he had asked about her educational philosophy. He had listened to her answers. He had treated her ideas with respect. It was, Vivian realized with a start, the first real conversation she'd had since arriving in Stillwater. That evening, alone in her cottage, she opened the envelope Matthew had delivered. Inside was a brief note from Jim Faulkner, along with a bank draft for $50. Miss Zimmerman, the note read, "My nephew informs me that your evening classes lack official support. Please accept this contribution toward lamp oil, books, and whatever other supplies you require. Education lifts all boats, regardless of who rows them. Your discretion is appreciated. Respectfully, James Faulkner." Vivian stared at the bank draft, astonishment giving way to gratitude. The sum represented more than a month of her teaching salary. With it, she could purchase the primers her adult students desperately needed, replace the smoky lamps that strained their eyes during evening lessons, perhaps even afford a small stove to warm the schoolroom during winter nights. More significant than the money, however, was the validation. Someone in Stillwater, someone with influence, believed in her work, all of her work, not just the parts that conformed to the town's expectations. For the first time since her arrival, Vivian felt something loosen in her chest. Perhaps she wasn't as alone in her mission as she had believed. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that hinted at the approaching autumn. Vivian spent the morning at the general store, selecting fabric for the school's upcoming Christmas pageant costumes. By 2 o'clock, she was back at her cottage, changing into her second-best dress, a sky-blue cotton with white trim that was modest enough for a social call, yet nice enough to show respect for her host. At precisely 3 o'clock, the sound of wagon wheels announced Matthew's arrival. Vivian stepped onto her porch to find him handling a matched pair of chestnut horses attached to a well-maintained buckboard. "Miss Zimmerman," he called, setting the brake and jumping down, "ready for your adventure to Cross Creek." "Is it an adventure?" she asked, accepting his hand as he helped her into the wagon. "Any journey can be an adventure with the right perspective," he replied, climbing up beside her. "Though I promise no bandits or stampedes between here and the ranch." "A relief to hear," Vivian said, settling her skirts around her. "I neglected to pack my six-shooter and lasso." Matthew laughed as he released the brake. A teacher with a sense of humor. No wonder the children are learning so well. The ride to Cross Creek took them through rolling grasslands dotted with grazing cattle. Matthew pointed out landmarks along the way, a lightning-struck oak where local children claimed to see ghosts, a bend in the creek where the fishing was particularly good, a distant line of cottonwoods that marked the boundary between Faulkner land and the neighboring Hayes Ranch. "Hayes has been trying to buy Uncle Jim out for years," Matthew explained, guiding the horses around a rut in the road. "Keeps raising his offer, especially since Jim's accident." "Will your uncle sell?" Vivian asked, genuinely interested. Land transactions were the lifeblood of frontier economies, affecting everything from school attendance to town politics. "Not while he's breathing," Matthew replied with certainty. "Cross Creek is more than property to him. It's the culmination of everything he believes in: hard work, self-sufficiency, building something that matters." "You sound like you share his philosophy." Matthew considered this as the wagon crested a small rise, revealing the ranch buildings in the distance. "In most ways, Uncle Jim came west to claim something: land, opportunity, a fresh start after losing everything in the war. I came west to find something." "And have you found it, I mean?" His eyes met hers briefly, then returned to the road. "Still looking, I suppose, but the search feels worthwhile." The conversation shifted to safer topics as they approached the ranch house, a substantial two-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide veranda wrapping around 3 sides. Corrals, a barn, and several outbuildings completed the tidy compound, while cottonwoods provided shade against the Texas sun. Jim Faulkner awaited them on the veranda, seated in a wooden chair with his splinted leg propped on a stool. Despite his injury and his 70 years, the elder Faulkner radiated vitality. His white hair and beard were neatly trimmed, and his eyes, the same clear blue as his nephew's, sparkled with intelligence. "Miss Zimmerman," he called as Matthew helped her down from the wagon, What an honor to have you grace my humble abode. I'd stand to greet you properly, but the doctor threatens dire consequences if I put weight on this confounded leg. The honor is mine, Mr. Faulkner, Vivian replied, climbing the steps to take his offered hand. Your generous donation to the school library has already inspired several reluctant readers. Books are the best investment a community can make, Jim declared. Cattle prices rise and fall, crops succeed or fail, but knowledge only appreciates. He gestured toward the door. Come inside, please. Mrs. Rodriguez has prepared enough food to feed a cavalry regiment, and she'll have my hide if we let it get cold. The interior of the ranch house surprised Vivian. While the structure was frontier practical, the furnishings spoke of culture and refinement. Bookshelves lined the walls of the main room, paintings hung in careful arrangements, and a piano occupied one corner. The dining room continued this theme of civilized comfort, with a polished table set with china that, while not extravagant, showed quality and care. Mrs. Rodriguez, the Faulkners' housekeeper, was a dignified Mexican woman who served them an excellent meal of roast beef, vegetables from the ranch garden, and fresh bread. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed easily between educational theory, ranch operations, and local politics. The town council votes next month on extending the school term, Jim noted as they finished their meal. Chester Hollingsworth is leading the opposition, says children need practical experience more than book learning. Chester is welcome to his opinion, Vivian replied diplomatically, though I find it interesting that his own children attend boarding school in San Antonio. Matthew raised an eyebrow. A case of do as I say, not as I do. It's not uncommon, Jim observed. Many who oppose education most vocally ensure their own families receive the best available. The issue isn't really about education at all, Vivian said, setting down her fork. It's about who deserves access to it and who gets to decide. She paused, realizing she had perhaps spoken too freely. Forgive me, I don't mean to bring politics to your table. Jim waved away her concern. My dear, there's no subject I enjoy more than honest discourse, particularly from someone who has clearly given the matter careful thought. He glanced at Matthew, something unspoken passing between them. Now, if you've finished your dessert, perhaps you'd allow Matthew to show you the library while I rest my leg for a bit. Doctor's orders, I'm afraid. Of course, Vivian agreed, rising. Thank you for a lovely meal. Matthew led her down a hallway to a room at the back of the house. When he opened the door, Vivian couldn't suppress a gasp of delight. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered 3 walls, filled with volumes on every conceivable subject. A large desk occupied one corner, while comfortable reading chairs were positioned near windows that captured the afternoon light. This is magnificent, she breathed, moving into the room. I've never seen a private library this extensive outside of Philadelphia. Uncle Jim's life's work, Matthew explained, watching her explore. He started with a dozen books and has been adding to the collection for 40 years. Trading, purchasing when he could, accepting donations when offered. Vivian ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles that ranged from classical literature to scientific treatises, from historical accounts to poetry collections. This is a treasure. Does he allow others to use it? That's actually why he wanted me to show you this. Matthew moved to the desk and picked up a large ledger. This is the catalog, every book, its condition, and its location. Uncle Jim has been considering ways to make his collection more accessible to the community. Understanding dawned, a lending library. Matthew nodded, administered through the school with you as its keeper. If you're willing. Willing, Vivian could hardly contain her excitement. It would be transformative for the children, for the entire town, but surely Mr. Faulkner doesn't want these valuable books leaving his home. He's thought about that. Matthew opened a drawer and withdrew a sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. His proposal is to start with a selection of duplicate volumes and more robust editions, about 100 books. If the experiment proves successful, he'd gradually expand the offerings. Vivian took the paper, scanning the detailed plan. It addressed every practical concern, from a simple checkout system to provisions for damaged books. This is remarkably thorough. Uncle Jim doesn't do anything halfway, Matthew said with evident pride. He believes this town is on the cusp of becoming something significant, not just another cattle stop, but a real community with a future beyond beef and boundaries. That's a beautiful vision, Vivian murmured, still reading the proposal. Though not everyone in Stillwater shares it. Progress always faces resistance, Matthew replied, leaning against the desk. That doesn't make it any less necessary. Vivian looked up, struck by the conviction in his voice. You speak as though you've given this considerable thought. I have, he met her gaze directly. Before coming to help Uncle Jim, I was studying law in St. Louis. My focus was on the evolving legal structures of frontier communities, how they transition from survival-based governance to sustainable civic institutions. That's fascinating, Vivian said, genuinely intrigued. Most men I've met view the frontier's lawlessness as an advantage, not a phase to outgrow. Those men mistake freedom for chaos, Matthew replied. True freedom requires structure, fair laws, equal application, civic responsibility. Otherwise, it's just anarchy with a prettier name. They were still discussing the relationship between education and civic development when Jim Faulkner rejoined them an hour later, making his way carefully on a pair of crutches. I see you've discovered my secret ambition, he said, easing himself into one of the reading chairs, to turn Stillwater into a beacon of learning on the Texas frontier. It's an admirable ambition, Vivian assured him. And your lending library proposal is brilliant. I would be honored to help implement it. Excellent, Jim clapped his hands together. Matthew, pour us some of that good brandy. This calls for a toast. Matthew obliged, bringing small glasses for each of them. Jim raised his. To knowledge freely shared, minds fully engaged, and communities built on more than mere necessity. They drank to the sentiment, and Vivian felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the brandy. For the first time since arriving in Texas, she felt part of something larger than herself, a vision for what the frontier could become, not just what it currently was. The afternoon stretched into early evening, with conversation flowing between literature, philosophy, and practical matters of implementation. When it was finally time to leave, Vivian felt reluctant to break the spell of intellectual connection. You must come again, Jim insisted as Matthew helped her into the wagon, perhaps next weekend. We could review the initial book selections for the lending program. I would like that very much, Vivian replied. Thank you for your hospitality and for your vision. As they drove back toward town in the gathering dusk, Vivian felt herself relaxing into a comfortable silence with Matthew. The shared experience at Cross Creek had established a foundation of mutual respect that made conversation unnecessary. When he finally spoke, his words surprised her. You're not what I expected, Miss Zimmerman. Oh, she turned slightly to see his profile against the darkening sky. What did you expect? Uncle Jim's letters described you as formidable and unwavering in your convictions. I imagined someone sterner. Vivian laughed softly. I can be quite stern when necessary. Just ask any of my students who neglect their arithmetic. I don't doubt it, Matthew replied with a smile. But there's something else there, a genuine joy in ideas, in possibilities. It's refreshing. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Thank you, though I suspect your uncle possesses the same quality. Your family seems to value thinking differently. Necessity taught him that, Matthew explained. After losing everything in Virginia, he had to reimagine what a good life could be. It either breaks you or remakes you, that kind of loss. And you, Vivian asked quietly, what has shaped your thinking? Matthew was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice had softened. Watching good people suffer from preventable injustices, seeing communities tear themselves apart over misunderstandings that education might have prevented, recognizing that the greatest threat to the frontier isn't Indians or outlaws, it's ignorance. The passion in his words resonated with Vivian's deepest convictions. That's why I came west, she admitted. In Philadelphia, education is taken for granted among certain classes, denied completely to others. Here, the slate is still being written. There's a chance to get it right from the beginning. Exactly, Matthew agreed, his tone warming with enthusiasm. The institutions we build now will shape this territory for generations. Schools, courts, local governance, they're all being established in our lifetime. What an opportunity that represents. Their shared excitement carried them into town, where lamps now glowed in windows, and the saloon spilled raucous laughter into the night. Matthew drew the wagon to a stop outside Vivian's cottage. "Thank you for coming today," he said, helping her down. "Uncle Jim enjoyed your company immensely." "And I his," Vivian replied, suddenly aware of how close they stood in the darkness. "Thank you for the invitation." Matthew seemed about to say something more, but a voice from the street interrupted the moment. "Well now, what have we here?" Chester Hollingsworth emerged from the shadows, his substantial frame silhouetted against the distant glow of the saloon. "Our schoolmarm returning from a day's education." The insinuation in his tone was unmistakable. Vivian stiffened, but Matthew's response was calm and immediate. "Good evening, Mr. Hollingsworth. I've just returned Miss Zimmerman from dinner with my uncle, who's eager to discuss her ideas for expanding educational opportunities in Stillwater." His voice carried just enough volume to be heard by anyone nearby. "Perhaps you'd like to join us next weekend when we continue the conversation. Jim Faulkner values input from all of Stillwater's prominent citizens." Chester's momentum faltered visibly. Jim Faulkner's social standing exceeded even his own, and a direct invitation to Cross Creek was not something to be dismissed lightly. "Perhaps I will," he said, less certainty in his tone. "Though I maintain that our current school term is quite adequate for local needs." "Uncle Jim would welcome the debate," Matthew replied pleasantly. "He believes robust disagreement leads to better outcomes for all concerned." With a noncommittal grunt, Chester continued on his way, leaving Vivian and Matthew alone again. "That was skillfully handled," Vivian observed once Chester was out of earshot. "Though I hope your uncle won't be surprised by Mr. Hollingsworth's potential arrival next Saturday." Matthew's smile returned. "Uncle Jim has been outmaneuvering men like Chester Hollingsworth for decades. He'll consider it entertainment." He hesitated, then added, "I should warn you, though, Chester isn't the only one in town who might misinterpret our association. I'm well aware of frontier gossip, Mr. Faulkner. It doesn't concern me." "Good," he stepped back, maintaining proper distance. "Then I'll call for you next Saturday at the same time." "I look forward to it." As Matthew drove away, Vivian remained on her porch, watching until the wagon disappeared around a corner. A strange feeling settled in her chest, not the flutter of romantic attraction that novels described, but something more substantial: recognition, respect, intellectual kinship. And perhaps, though she was reluctant to admit it even to herself, the first stirrings of something deeper. The following week passed in a blur of teaching duties, evening literacy classes, and preparations for the lending library program. Vivian found herself thinking of Matthew Faulkner at odd moments, remembering his insights during their conversations, his evident respect for his uncle, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. But she ruthlessly disciplined these thoughts. She had not come west to find romance. Her purpose was education, independence, the building of something meaningful beyond the domestic sphere that most women were confined to. Allowing herself to be distracted by a handsome face and a keen mind, even one that seemed to value her intellect, would be a betrayal of her own ambitions. Saturday arrived with unexpected complications. 3 of her students had fallen ill with fever, requiring Vivian to visit their homes with assignments and reassurance. By the time she returned to her cottage, it was nearly 2:30, leaving barely enough time to change before Matthew's arrival. She was still pinning her hair when a knock sounded at her door. Checking the clock, she frowned. It was only 10 minutes to 3. Matthew was early, but when she opened the door, it wasn't Matthew who stood on her porch. Instead, a ranch hand she recognized from town shifted nervously from foot to foot, hat in hand. "Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Faulkner sent me to fetch you. There's been an accident out at Cross Creek." Fear clutched at Vivian's throat. "What kind of accident? Is Mr. Faulkner, Jim Faulkner, all right?" "The elder Mr. Faulkner is fine, ma'am. It's the younger one. Horse threw him while they were checking fence lines. He's banged up pretty bad." "The old man thought you should know, since you were expected." Relief that Jim was unharmed quickly gave way to concern for Matthew. "How seriously is he injured?" "Doc Simmons is with him now. That's all I know, ma'am, Mr. Faulkner said to tell you he understands if you'd rather not come under the circumstances." Vivian's decision was immediate. "Of course I'll come. Give me one moment to collect my things." She grabbed her shawl and a small basket of ginger cookies she'd baked for the visit, then followed the ranch hand to his wagon. The trip to Cross Creek seemed interminably longer than her previous journey, though the ranch hand, who introduced himself as Tom, drove at a considerable pace. When they arrived, Mrs. Rodriguez met them at the door, her normally composed features tight with worry. The doctor is still with him. Senor Jim is in the library. Vivian found the elder Faulkner pacing awkwardly with his crutches, his face drawn with concern. Miss Zimmerman, thank you for coming despite our unfortunate circumstances. Of course, she replied, setting down her basket. What happened? Jim sighed heavily, foolishness and bad luck in equal measure. Matthew was checking the north fence line when his horse spooked at a rattlesnake. Threw him against the rocks. He shook his head, found him unconscious, 2 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a gash on his head that bled like the devil. How terrible, Vivian murmured. Is he conscious now? Yes, though the doctor gave him something for the pain that's made him a bit foggy. Doc's just finishing the bandaging now. Jim studied her face. You didn't have to come, you know. We could have rescheduled our library planning. I wouldn't dream of leaving you to manage alone, especially with both of you injured. Vivian removed her shawl. Please tell me how I can help. Jim's weathered face softened with gratitude. You're a remarkable young woman, Miss Zimmerman. If you're certain you wish to stay, Mrs. Rodriguez could use assistance preparing supper while I speak with the doctor. For the next hour, Vivian helped in the kitchen, following the housekeeper's instructions as they prepared a simple meal suitable for an invalid. When Mrs. Rodriguez went to check on Matthew, Vivian remained behind, organizing a tray with broth, tea, and soft bread. She was just adding one of her ginger cookies to the tray when Mrs. Rodriguez returned. Senor Matthew is asking for you, Miss Zimmerman, if you would take the tray. Somewhat surprised, Vivian nodded. Of course. Mrs. Rodriguez led her upstairs to a bedroom at the end of the hallway. She knocked once, then opened the door. I have brought Miss Zimmerman, as you asked. Inside, Matthew lay propped against pillows, his left arm bandaged and secured against his chest, a white dressing visible at his hairline. Despite his injuries, he attempted to straighten when he saw Vivian, wincing with the effort. Please don't try to move, she said quickly, setting the tray on a nearby table. You'll aggravate your injuries. Miss Zimmerman, he said, his voice rougher than usual, you didn't have to come. So your uncle informed me, she replied, moving a chair closer to the bedside. Yet here I am nonetheless. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Stubbornness seems to be a shared trait among educators and Faulkners. A fortunate compatibility, she agreed, pouring him a cup of tea. How are you feeling? Like I've been trampled by a particularly vindictive Mustang, he admitted, accepting the tea with his good hand, but the doctor assures me nothing is permanent. Just inconvenient. And painful, I imagine. That too, he sipped the tea carefully. Uncle Jim said you helped Mrs. Rodriguez with supper. I apologize for turning you into kitchen staff. I don't mind, Vivian assured him. Though I should warn you that my cooking skills are elementary at best. The school board values my ability to teach geometry more than my prowess with pastry. That earned a genuine laugh, followed immediately by a grimace as the movement jarred his ribs. Please don't make me laugh, it's excruciating. I'll try to be utterly dull, she promised, arranging the tray so he could reach the broth, though I make no guarantees. Teaching requires a certain theatrical flair. Matthew studied her face as she worked. You really don't have to stay, you know. This isn't what you signed up for when you accepted our invitation. What did I sign up for, Mr. Faulkner? Intellectual conversation, library planning, decent food and better company. He gestured to his injured state with his good hand, not playing nurse to a cowboy who can't stay on his horse. Vivian considered him thoughtfully. Do you really think my interest in Cross Creek is so superficial that I value only the intellectual stimulation it provides? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I wouldn't presume to know what you value, Miss Zimmerman. Then allow me to tell you, she said firmly. I value authenticity. I value people who mean what they say and say what they mean. I value the Faulkner's vision for what this community could become. She paused, then added more softly, and I value the unexpected friendship I've found here. So yes, Mr. Faulkner, I'm staying, at least until I'm assured you're properly fed and on the mend. Something shifted in Matthew's expression, a softening, a vulnerability that his usual composed demeanor kept hidden. "In that case," he said quietly, "I'm very glad you came." The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken sentiment. Then Vivian straightened, returning to practicality. "Now, you should eat something before the broth gets cold." "Doctor's orders, I'm sure." She remained with him while he ate, conversation flowing easily despite his condition. When his responses began to slow, his eyelids growing heavy from the medication and exhaustion, she collected the tray and quietly withdrew. Downstairs, she found Jim Faulkner in the dining room with Dr. Simmons, both men engaged in quiet conversation over coffee. "Ah, Miss Zimmerman," Jim greeted her. "How's our patient?" "Resting now," she replied, setting down the tray. "He managed some broth and tea." Dr. Simmons nodded approvingly. "Good, he'll be sore for a week or more, but with proper rest he should recover fully." He rose, gathering his medical bag. "I'll return tomorrow to check the bandages. Until then, keep him quiet and make sure he drinks plenty of fluids." After the doctor left, Jim turned to Vivian with a troubled expression. "Miss Zimmerman, I find myself in an awkward position. Matthew's injuries leave us short-handed, and with my own mobility limited." "How can I help?" Vivian asked immediately. "You've already done more than could be expected," Jim assured her, "but I must impose further on your kindness. Would you consider staying at Cross Creek for a day or two, Mrs. Rodriguez is an excellent housekeeper, but she cannot manage both the household duties and nursing care. I would, of course, arrange for proper accommodations in town if—" "I'll stay," Vivian interrupted. "There's no school tomorrow, and I can easily postpone Monday's classes if necessary." Relief washed over Jim's features. "You're a godsend, Miss Zimmerman. I'll have Tom take a message to town informing the school board of the situation." No one could object to your assistance under these circumstances. But they would object, Vivian knew. Her reputation, carefully maintained since her arrival in Stillwater, would inevitably suffer. An unmarried woman staying at a ranch with two bachelor Faulkners, regardless of their injuries or the presence of Mrs. Rodriguez, would raise eyebrows and whispers. Yet as she helped Mrs. Rodriguez prepare a guest room, as she wrote a brief note to the school board explaining her absence, as she checked on Matthew one last time before retiring, Vivian found she cared less about those whispers than she expected. Some things she was discovering mattered more than propriety, compassion, loyalty, the bonds of genuine friendship formed through shared values and mutual respect, and perhaps, though she was still reluctant to acknowledge it, something deeper taking root in her heart. The next day dawned clear and cool, autumn's approach evident in the crispness of the air. Vivian rose early, having slept surprisingly well in the comfortable guest room. She dressed in the same clothes from the previous day, grateful that her habit of practical attire meant she wasn't burdened with elaborate gowns requiring assistance. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Rodriguez already preparing breakfast. The housekeeper greeted her with newfound warmth. "Buenos dias, Miss Zimmerman. Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." Vivian rolled up her sleeves. "May I help with breakfast?" Together, they prepared a simple meal of cornbread, eggs, and coffee. Jim Faulkner appeared just as they finished, making his way carefully on his crutches. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, "I trust you were comfortable." "Perfectly, thank you." "How is Matthew this morning?" "Stubborn," Jim replied with a mixture of exasperation and pride. "Insists he can get up today. I told him the doctor would have my hide if I allowed it." "Perhaps I should take up his breakfast," Vivian suggested. "I might have more success convincing him to rest." Jim's eyes twinkled, an excellent suggestion. Matthew was always more inclined to listen to a pretty face than his old uncle's advice. The comment might have bothered Vivian from another man, but Jim's obvious respect for her intelligence made it clear he was teasing rather than dismissing her. She prepared a tray with breakfast and fresh coffee, then made her way upstairs. Matthew was awake when she knocked, sitting up against his pillows with evident discomfort. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. "You're still here." "Your powers of observation remain intact despite your injuries," she replied dryly, setting the tray across his lap. "Your uncle asked me to stay for a day or two to help while you recover." Matthew frowned. "That's not necessary, I'm perfectly capable of." He attempted to shift position and immediately winced, his face paling with pain. Yes, I can see how capable you are, Vivian observed. Eat your breakfast, Mr. Faulkner. Doctor's orders. To her surprise, he complied without further argument, watching her as she moved around the room, straightening the already neat space. When he finished eating, she removed the tray and helped him adjust his pillows for greater comfort. Why did you agree to stay? He asked as she worked. Surely you realize this will cause gossip in town. Vivian paused, meeting his gaze directly. Do you know what I realized yesterday, Mr. Faulkner? That I've spent my entire life worrying about what others might think or say. In Philadelphia, every action was judged against an impossible standard of feminine propriety. I came west to escape that cage, yet found myself building another one, constructed of different materials perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. And now, Matthew prompted when she fell silent. Now I'm choosing to act according to my own judgment rather than anticipating the judgments of others, she replied simply. You need help, I can provide it, the rest is irrelevant. Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. You're a remarkable woman, Vivian Zimmerman. The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Rest now, she said, collecting the breakfast tray. I'll return later with something to read. Unless you prefer to stare at the ceiling all day. His smile was answer enough. The day passed in a rhythm of care and conversation. Vivian divided her time between assisting Mrs. Rodriguez with household tasks, discussing library plans with Jim in the study, and bringing food, medicine, and company to Matthew. By evening, a comfortable familiarity had developed between the three of them. They ate dinner together in Matthew's room, with Jim recounting stories from his early days on the frontier and Vivian sharing anecdotes from her teaching experiences. Despite his injuries, Matthew contributed his own tales, revealing a dry wit that frequently drew laughter from both Vivian and his uncle. When Jim finally excused himself to rest his leg, Vivian lingered, enjoying the easy conversation that had developed between her and Matthew. You should go too, he said eventually, though his tone suggested reluctance. You've been tending to everyone else all day. You must be exhausted. Not quite yet, she admitted. Actually, I've been meaning to ask you something. What's that? Your legal studies. Do you intend to resume them once your uncle recovers? Matthew's expression grew thoughtful. I've been considering that question myself lately. Before Uncle Jim's accident, the answer was yes. I came here temporarily to help family in need. But now, she prompted when he hesitated. Now I find myself reconsidering what constitutes a meaningful life. He gestured toward the window, where the last light of day painted the landscape in gold. This land, this community, it's not what I expected, but it offers possibilities I hadn't considered. Such as the chance to build something lasting, to help shape a community from its foundations rather than simply practicing law within an established system. His gaze returned to her face. And the opportunity to work alongside others who share that vision. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Vivian found herself at a crossroads, acknowledge what was developing between them, or retreat to the safety of impersonal topics. Courage one, is that why you've never asked about my background? She inquired. Most men in town made inquiries about my family, my connections, my reasons for coming west, all within minutes of meeting me. I was more interested in your ideas than your history, Matthew replied. Though I admit to curiosity about what brought someone with your intelligence and education to a place like Stillwater. Freedom, she said simply. My parents died when I was 16. My aunt raised me with one purpose, to make an advantageous marriage that would secure the family's social position in Philadelphia. My education was merely decorative, designed to attract a certain caliber of husband. She smoothed her skirt, a habit from childhood when discussing uncomfortable topics. When I turned 18, my aunt arranged a match with the son of a prominent banker, Thomas Blackwell, 45 years old, twice widowed, wealthy, influential, cold. Matthew's expression darkened. You didn't want the match. I refused it, Vivian corrected. Caused quite the scandal. My aunt threatened to disown me unless I reconsidered, so I applied for teaching positions as far from Philadelphia as possible. A small smile touched her lips. Stillwater responded first. Brave, Matthew murmured, coming alone to a place you knew nothing about. Desperate, she countered, though I prefer to think of it as determined. I wanted to build a life based on my own choices, not others' expectations. And have you built that life? The question gave her pause. I've begun it, she said finally. The school provides purpose. My students give meaning to that purpose, but building a life requires more than work, doesn't it? It requires connection, community, a sense of belonging. Have you found that in Stillwater? Not entirely, she admitted, though perhaps more than I expected. Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither had previously allowed themselves to consider. The spell broke when Mrs. Rodriguez knocked, entering with Matthew's evening medication. Vivian excused herself, retreating to her room with her thoughts in turmoil. She had not come west seeking romance. She had come for independence, for the chance to define herself through her work rather than through a man's expectations. Yet in Matthew Faulkner, she had found something unexpected, a man who seemed to value her mind as much as her appearance, who engaged with her ideas rather than merely tolerating them as a feminine peculiarity. Was it possible to maintain her hard-won independence while also opening herself to connection? Or were the two inherently incompatible on the frontier, where a woman's identity was so often subsumed by her husband's? These questions followed Vivian into sleep, where dreams of schoolrooms and libraries blended with images of Matthew's thoughtful gaze and the vast, promising landscape of Cross Creek Ranch. Monday morning brought Dr. Simmons's return. After examining Matthew, he pronounced him healing well but still required at least a week of rest before resuming even light duties. The doctor's assessment presented Vivian with a dilemma. She could hardly remain at Cross Creek indefinitely, yet her assistance was still clearly needed. Jim Faulkner provided the solution over breakfast. Miss Zimmerman, I've been thinking about your situation. While we greatly appreciate your help, I understand your responsibilities to the school must take precedence. The school board has approved a substitute for today, Vivian replied, but I should return to my duties tomorrow. Precisely my thought, Jim agreed. What would you say to a compromise? Return to town today, teach during the week, but perhaps you might consider coming back to Cross Creek on Friday afternoons. You could assist through the weekend and return to town Sunday evenings. Mrs. Rodriguez would remain as chaperone, of course. The arrangement was sensible, allowing Vivian to fulfill her teaching obligations while still providing the help that the Faulkners needed. Yet she hesitated, aware that even this limited arrangement would fuel town gossip. It's a generous offer, Mr. Faulkner, but I'm concerned about potential misinterpretations. Jim's expression grew serious. Miss Zimmerman, may I speak frankly? When she nodded, he continued, I've lived long enough to learn that those determined to think ill of others will do so regardless of facts. Your reputation in Stillwater was established long before you met us, as a woman of intelligence, principle, and dedication to her students. Anyone who matters will understand your assistance to an injured neighbor as an extension of that character, not a contradiction of it. His words resonated with her own evolving perspective. Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. In that case, I accept your proposal. After breakfast, Vivian went upstairs to inform Matthew of the arrangement and bid him goodbye until Friday. She found him sitting up in bed, attempting to read despite obvious discomfort. Your uncle has proposed a solution to our dilemma, she explained after describing the arrangement, if you have no objection. Matthew closed his book, his expression unreadable. The arrangement seems practical. But I would understand if you preferred to avoid further association with Cross Creek. Your position in town is important, and I wouldn't want to jeopardize it. Are you trying to discourage me, Mr. Faulkner? Vivian asked, a hint of challenge in her tone. No, he replied immediately. The opposite, in fact, but I feel responsible for putting you in this position. I put myself in this position, she reminded him, of my own free will and with full awareness of potential consequences. A smile finally broke through his serious expression. In that case, I look forward to Friday. As do I, she admitted. Though I expect you to follow the doctor's orders in the meantime. No getting out of bed before you're cleared to do so. Yes, ma'am, he replied with mock solemnity, though I warn you, confinement makes me restless. You may find me a difficult patient by week's end. I've managed 30 children under the age of 12 in a single room, Vivian retorted. I suspect I can handle one restless cowboy. His laughter followed her out the door, warming her heart despite the impending separation. Tom drove her back to town later that morning, delivering her to her cottage with promises to return on Friday afternoon. As expected, her temporary absence had already generated speculation. When she walked to the schoolhouse the following morning, she noticed the curious glances and whispered conversations that paused as she passed. The children, at least, welcomed her back with uncomplicated enthusiasm, eager to tell her about the substitute teacher's inferior methods and inability to control the rowdier boys. By lunchtime, Vivian had re-established order and resumed the normal rhythm of lessons. After school, however, she received her first direct confrontation about her absence. Chester Hollingsworth was waiting outside the schoolhouse, his substantial frame blocking the doorway as the last students departed. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "The town has been abuzz with talk of your weekend activities." "Good afternoon, Mr. Hollingsworth," she replied evenly. "I trust your cattle business is thriving." Her attempt to redirect the conversation failed. "Word is you've taken up residence at Cross Creek Ranch," he continued, his tone suggesting impropriety, "caring for young Faulkner after his accident." The emphasis on accident carried clear insinuation. Vivian straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Matthew Faulkner was injured when his horse threw him against rocks. I provided temporary assistance to the household at the elder Mr. Faulkner's request, given his own limited mobility. Mrs. Rodriguez was present as chaperone throughout my stay." "Very proper," Chester remarked with evident skepticism. "Though one wonders why a young, unmarried woman would place herself in such a delicate position." "The same reason I would visit any student's home when illness strikes," Vivian replied firmly. "Compassion doesn't recognize gender distinctions, Mr. Hollingsworth." Chester's expression hardened. "Compassion may not, Miss Zimmerman, but society certainly does. As chairman of the school board, I must remind you that your contract includes moral conduct clauses." The threat was barely veiled. Vivian felt anger rise in her chest but kept her voice steady. "I'm well aware of my contractual obligations, Mr. Hollingsworth. If you have specific concerns about my conduct, I suggest you raise them formally at the next board meeting, where I'll be happy to address them publicly." The prospect of public discussion clearly discomfited him. "That won't be necessary yet. I merely wish to advise caution in your associations, for your own sake, of course." "Your concern is noted," Vivian said coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare." Chester stepped aside reluctantly, but his parting words carried a clear warning. "The school term extension vote approaches, Miss Zimmerman. It would be unfortunate if personal matters influenced professional decisions." The encounter left Vivian shaken but resolute. Chester's thinly veiled threats confirmed what she had suspected. Her growing connection to the Faulkners threatened his influence in town. As the wealthiest rancher in the area, Chester was accustomed to deference and compliance. The Faulkners, with their education, refinement, and progressive ideas, represented a competing vision for Stillwater's future, and now Chester saw Vivian as aligned with that competing vision. Throughout the week she noticed similar, if less direct, reactions from others in town. Some, like the Reverend's wife, expressed concern for her reputation. Others, like the general store owner, mentioned rumors while carefully avoiding specifics. A few, including several parents of her students, demonstrated subtle support through small kindnesses and words of appreciation for her teaching. By Friday afternoon, when Tom arrived with the wagon to take her back to Cross Creek, Vivian had made her decision. She would not allow intimidation to dictate her choices. If her association with the Faulkners cost her standing with certain elements in Stillwater, so be it. Their vision for the community, one that valued education, culture, and progress, aligned with her own. The relief she felt upon returning to Cross Creek confirmed the rightness of her decision. Jim Faulkner greeted her warmly, updating her on Matthew's improvement as they walked to the house. "He's been impossible," Jim confided with evident affection. "Tried to get out of bed on Tuesday, nearly collapsed from pain. Mrs. Rodriguez threatened to tie him down if he didn't behave." "I'm not surprised," Vivian replied, smiling. "He doesn't strike me as a man who accepts limitation easily." "Faulkner trait," Jim acknowledged. "Stubbornness runs in the bloodline, but he'll be glad to see you. Been asking about you all week." The information sent a pleasant warmth through Vivian's chest, though she tried not to show it. I brought some books from the school collection, thought they might distract him from his confinement. When she entered Matthew's room a short while later, she found him sitting in a chair by the window, dressed in trousers and a loose shirt that accommodated his bandaged ribs and still immobilized shoulder. His face brightened visibly at her appearance. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, starting to rise. "Don't get up," she said quickly, setting down her bag of books. "How are you feeling?" "Better now," he replied with a frankness that brought color to her cheeks. "I was beginning to think Friday would never arrive. Your uncle says you've been a difficult patient." Matthew grimaced. "I'm not accustomed to idleness. Every hour feels like a day." He gestured to the small table beside him, covered with papers. "I've been reviewing the lending library catalog to keep from losing my mind entirely." Vivian moved closer to examine the papers. "You've made some additions to the initial selection. I hope you don't mind. I thought the original list needed more variety. Adventure for the boys, poetry for the romantic souls, some practical guides for those with specific interests." His thoughtfulness touched her. "It's perfect. A true community library should reflect diverse tastes and needs." Matthew's expression softened as he looked up at her. "How was your week? Did your absence cause difficulties?" Vivian hesitated, unwilling to burden him with Chester's threats. "Nothing I couldn't handle. The children were happy to have me back." "But the adults," he pressed, his perception too keen to be deceived. "Chester Hollingsworth in particular." She sighed, relenting. He expressed concerns about my association with Cross Creek, implied it might affect the school term extension vote. Matthew's jaw tightened. "I suspected as much. Chester sees Uncle Jim as his primary rival for influence in Stillwater. Now he's decided you're aligned with our camp." "Aren't I?" Vivian asked quietly. The question hung between them, weighted with significance beyond the immediate context of town politics. Matthew held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "I hope so," he said finally, "though I regret any difficulties it causes you." "I'm beginning to think some difficulties are worth facing," Vivian replied, surprising herself with her candor. "If they lied to something meaningful." The weekend passed in a blend of practical tasks and deepening connections. Vivian divided her time between helping Mrs. Rodriguez with household duties, discussing library plans with Jim, and keeping Matthew company during his convalescence. By Sunday evening, when she reluctantly prepared to return to town, the Cross Creek Ranch felt increasingly like a second home. "I hate to see you leave," Matthew admitted as they shared a final cup of coffee on the veranda. His recovery had progressed enough to allow short periods outdoors, and the autumn sunset painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber. "These past 2 days have been illuminating." "In what way?" Vivian asked, cradling her cup between her hands. Matthew seemed to choose his words carefully. "I've spent years studying law, governance, the structures that shape communities, but I'm beginning to realize that communities aren't built by structures alone. They're built by people who are willing to challenge conventions when those conventions no longer serve the greater good." "People like your uncle," Vivian suggested. "Like Uncle Jim's," he agreed, "and like you, Vivian." The use of her first name, rare and deliberate, emphasized the personal nature of his observation. Vivian found herself unable to retreat behind the safety of formality. "I'm just a schoolteacher trying to do my job well," she demurred. "You're far more than that," Matthew countered, his blue eyes intent on her face. "You're someone who sees beyond what is to what could be. Who acts according to principle rather than convenience, who values substance over appearance." The description touched her deeply, reflecting as it did her own highest aspirations. "You make me sound rather idealistic." "Is that a fault?" "Not a fault," she clarified, "but perhaps impractical in a world that operates by very different rules." Matthew considered this, his expression thoughtful. Maybe the world changes when enough impractical idealists refuse to accept its rules as immutable. Their conversation was interrupted by Tom's arrival, with the wagon to take Vivian back to town. As they said their goodbyes, Matthew held her hand a moment longer than strictly proper. "Until Friday?" he asked, a question in his tone that went beyond the simple words. Until Friday, she confirmed, answering both the spoken and unspoken inquiry. The pattern continued through October, weekdays in Stillwater, weekends at Cross Creek. Matthew's recovery progressed steadily, allowing him to resume light duties around the ranch. Vivian's role shifted from nurse to friend, then to something more difficult to define but increasingly precious to them both. Their conversations ranged from literature to law, from educational theory to community development, each exchange deepening their intellectual and emotional connection. Often Jim Faulkner joined them, his wisdom and experience adding depth to their discussions. Other times they found themselves alone, walking the grounds as Matthew regained his strength, sharing quiet evenings in the library, discovering the multitude of ways in which their minds aligned. In Stillwater, however, opposition to Vivian's Cross Creek Association intensified. Chester Hollingsworth had begun openly lobbying school board members against the term extension, citing Vivian's questionable judgment and divided loyalties. Other influential citizens, particularly those with business ties to Chester, echoed his concerns. The situation came to a head in early November, when Vivian received a formal summons to appear before the school board the following Tuesday evening. The letter, signed by Chester as chairman, cited matters pertaining to conduct and contractual obligations as the purpose of the meeting. The implicit threat was clear, her position was in jeopardy. Vivian took the letter to Cross Creek that weekend, seeking advice from both Faulkners. The three of them gathered in the library after dinner, the letter spread on the desk before them. "He's overplaying his hand," Jim observed after reading the summons. "Even Chester doesn't have enough influence to dismiss a teacher midterm without substantial cause." "But he could prevent the term extension," Vivian pointed out, "and potentially block my contract renewal next year." "He's bluffing," Matthew insisted, pacing the room despite his still healing ribs, using the threat of public embarrassment to force compliance. He stopped suddenly, turning to face Vivian. "Unless there's something more we don't know, has anything happened in town to give him legitimate ammunition?" "Nothing beyond my weekend visits here," Vivian replied, "though those alone seem sufficient in some minds to question my character." Jim snorted derisively, small minds seeking smaller faults. "What Chester truly fears is losing his grip on Stillwater's future." He leaned forward, his weathered hands folded on the desk. "This was inevitable, Miss Zimmerman, not because of any impropriety, but because you represent a threat to the established order, an educated woman with independent ideas, aligned with the Faulkner vision rather than the Hollingsworth agenda." "What should I do?" Vivian asked, looking between the two men. "I won't renounce our friendship to appease Chester's ego, but I can't bear the thought of losing the school. The children deserve better than to become pawns in this power struggle." Matthew moved to her side, his expression resolute. "You fight, Vivian, we fight together." "How?" she asked, both heartened and daunted by his determination. "By confronting Chester on his own terms," Jim replied, a strategic glint in his eye. "The board meeting is public, correct?" Vivian nodded. "All citizens may attend, though only board members may vote." "Then we ensure it's well attended," Jim said. "Parents of your students. Businessmen who understand the economic value of education. Citizens who believe in Stillwater's potential beyond cattle and commerce." "A show of community support," Matthew elaborated, catching his uncle's intention. "Demonstrating that Chester doesn't speak for everyone, that there's a constituency for progress as well as tradition." "And I will be there," Jim added firmly. "Time I showed my face in town again anyway. My leg is nearly healed, and Chester should be reminded that there are two Faulkners now, not just one old man he can dismiss." The strategy gave Vivian hope, but practical concerns remained. What if it's not enough? Chester has appointed most of the current board members. They depend on his goodwill for various business arrangements. "Then we prepare for that possibility as well," Matthew said. "Cross Creek's old bunkhouse could be converted into a schoolroom. We could offer independent education for families who value it, regardless of the board's decision." The suggestion startled Vivian. "You would do that, create an alternative school?" "In a heartbeat," Jim confirmed. "Education matters too much to leave it in the hands of men like Chester Hollingsworth." Matthew's expression softened as he looked at Vivian. "Whatever happens Tuesday night, you won't face it alone." "That's a promise." The assurance meant more to Vivian than she could express. Throughout her life, she had fought her battles singly, against her aunt's matrimonial schemes, against the limitations placed on women's ambitions, against the frontier's harsh demands. The notion of allies, of not standing alone, was novel and deeply moving. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "Both of you." Jim excused himself shortly afterward, leaving Matthew and Vivian alone in the library. For several minutes they sat in companionable silence, the crackling fire and ticking clock the only sounds in the room. Finally, Matthew spoke, his voice quiet but intent. "There's something I need to say, Vivian. Something I've been wanting to tell you for weeks." The seriousness of his tone caught her attention. "What is it?" Matthew moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. "Before I met you, I saw the law as my path to making a difference. I believed the right statutes, the proper application of justice, could create the community I envisioned." He paused, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "But you've shown me something different, that real change happens through people, not policies, through teaching children to think for themselves, through standing firm when it would be easier to compromise, through seeing potential where others see only the present." Vivian's heart quickened at his words and the intensity behind them. "Matthew, please let me finish," he requested softly. "I need to say this clearly. Vivian Zimmerman, I love you, not for your beauty, though you are beautiful, not for your kindness, though you are kind. I love you for your mind, for your ideas, your principles, your courage in defending them. I love the way you see the world and your determination to improve it." His voice grew husky with emotion. "And I would be honored if you would consider a life partnership with me, not one where your identity is subsumed by mine, but where we build something together, each contributing our unique strengths to a shared vision." The declaration, so unlike the conventional proposals Vivian had rejected in Philadelphia, struck at the core of her deepest hopes. Yet caution born of long experience made her hesitate. "Matthew, I care for you deeply," she began, choosing her words carefully, "more than I ever expected to care for anyone, but marriage on the frontier. It changes things for a woman in ways it doesn't for a man. My independence, my teaching." "Would continue," he interrupted firmly. "I'm not asking you to become my housekeeper or to set aside your vocation. I'm asking to stand beside you, to support your work as you would support mine, to build a life that honors both our callings. And if the school board dismisses me, if Chester's influence prevails, then we create alternatives," Matthew replied without hesitation. "A private academy at Cross Creek, educational programs through the lending library, summer institutes for advanced students." His eyes held hers, earnest and unwavering. "Vivian, I'm not proposing despite your teaching vocation. I'm proposing because of it. Your commitment to education, to shaping young minds, is integral to who you are. I would never ask you to diminish that." The sincerity in his voice, the respect in his eyes, they spoke to Vivian's deepest yearning, not just for love but for partnership, not just for acceptance but for celebration of her whole self. "I love you too, Matthew," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I have for some time, though I was afraid to acknowledge it, afraid it would mean sacrificing everything else I've worked for." "Never," he promised, raising her hands to his lips. "We'll face whatever comes together, Chester Hollingsworth, school boards, frontier challenges, partners in every sense." Vivian studied his face, searching for any hint of reservation or conventional expectation. Finding none, she made her decision. "Then yes, Matthew Faulkner, I will marry you, not as a surrender of independence but as an affirmation of partnership." The joy that illuminated his features at her acceptance warmed Vivian to her core. Matthew rose, drawing her to her feet and into a gentle embrace that respected his still healing ribs. Their first kiss, when it came, felt like a promise, tender yet strong, passionate yet thoughtful, a physical expression of the intellectual and emotional bond that had grown between them. When they finally separated, Matthew pressed his forehead to hers. "We'll tell Uncle Jim in the morning," he murmured, "though I suspect he's been plotting this outcome since the day he first mentioned you in his letters." "Your uncle is a very perceptive man," Vivian replied with a smile. "Though I'm curious, what did those letters say about me?" Matthew's expression turned sheepish. That Stillwater had acquired a schoolteacher who valued books over bonnets, ideas over appearances, and principles over popularity. "He suggested I might find such a woman worth knowing." "Definitely plotting," Vivian laughed softly, Remind me to thank him." The remainder of the evening passed in quiet conversation about their future, practical matters of timing and arrangements, deeper discussions of shared values and individual aspirations, mutual assurances that their partnership would enhance rather than constrain their separate identities. When Tom drove Vivian back to town the following evening, she carried not only her personal belongings but also a precious secret: the knowledge that whatever happened at Tuesday's board meeting, her future held possibilities far beyond Stillwater's limited imagination. The school board meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock in the town hall, a modest building that served multiple civic functions. Vivian arrived early, her heart pounding despite her outward composure. She had spent Monday preparing her defense, gathering evidence of her students' progress and testimonials from supportive parents. Whether these would sway a board already influenced by Chester remained uncertain, but she was determined to present her case with dignity and conviction. By 6:45, the hall was filling rapidly, far beyond the usual attendance for school board proceedings. Vivian noticed several of her students' parents, local shopkeepers, and even a few ranchers who typically avoided town affairs. Their presence gave her hope that Jim's strategy of community support might succeed. At 5 minutes to 7, a stir near the entrance drew her attention. Jim Faulkner entered, leaning on a cane but walking with determined dignity. Matthew followed, his bearing suggesting strength restored despite his recent injuries. The two men made their way to seats directly behind Vivian, each nodding respectfully as they passed. Chester Hollingsworth arrived moments later, his expression darkening visibly at the unexpectedly large attendance. He conferred briefly with other board members before calling the meeting to order with sharp raps of his gavel. "First item of business," he announced without preamble, "the conduct and contractual obligations of Miss Vivian Zimmerman, current teacher of Stillwater School." Vivian rose, facing the board with calm determination. "I am prepared to address the board's concerns, Mr. Chairman." Chester's mouth tightened. "The board has received reports of behavior potentially inconsistent with the moral conduct clauses of your teaching contract, Miss Zimmerman. Specifically, your extended presence at Cross Creek Ranch, in the company of unmarried men, without proper familial relationship." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Before Vivian could respond, Jim Faulkner's voice cut through the whispers, strong despite his years. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman. As the proprietor of Cross Creek Ranch, I believe I should be permitted to address these allegations directly." Chester could hardly refuse without appearing unreasonable before the assembled citizens. "The board recognizes Mr. James Faulkner," he said reluctantly. Jim rose, his weathered face composed but determined. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, citizens of Stillwater. I invited Miss Zimmerman to Cross Creek Ranch initially to discuss educational matters, specifically, the establishment of a community lending library from my personal collection. When my nephew suffered serious injuries, I requested Miss Zimmerman's assistance during his recovery, given my own limited mobility." He gestured to his cane for emphasis. "Throughout Miss Zimmerman's visits, my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, was present as chaperone. Miss Zimmerman conducted herself with absolute propriety at all times. Any suggestion otherwise is not merely inaccurate, but borders on slander against a lady of impeccable character." The forceful defense, delivered with Jim's natural authority, clearly made an impression on the audience. Chester, however, pressed his attack. "While we appreciate Mr. Faulkner's perspective, the issue remains that appearances matter in a position of influence over impressionable children. A young, unmarried woman spending weekends at a bachelor establishment, regardless of chaperonage, sets a questionable example." "If I may respond, Mr. Chairman," Vivian requested, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Chester nodded curtly. "The board recognizes Miss Zimmerman." Vivian addressed not just the board but the entire assembly. "Since arriving in Stillwater, I have dedicated myself to providing the highest quality education possible to this community's children. My conduct, both professional and personal, has been guided by principles of service, integrity, and compassion." She paused, making eye contact with several parents in the audience. "When Mr. Matthew Faulkner was injured, I responded as I would to any community member in need, with practical assistance. The same way I visited the Reynolds family when influenza struck their household. The same way I stayed 3 nights with the Wilsons when Mrs. Wilson's difficult childbirth required Mr. Wilson's constant attendance. Nods from both families confirmed these examples. The frontier demands cooperation and mutual aid, Vivian continued. If we begin questioning the propriety of neighbors helping neighbors in times of need, we undermine the very fabric that allows communities like Stillwater to survive and thrive. Approving murmurs followed her statement. Emboldened, Vivian pressed her advantage. As for my teaching duties, I invite any board member to visit my classroom and observe the progress our children have made, or to review their academic achievements, which I have documented here. She indicated the papers she had brought. My students' welfare and education remain my highest priority, regardless of personal circumstances. For a moment, Chester seemed at a loss for response. Then his expression hardened. Pretty words, Miss Zimmerman, but they don't address the fundamental issue. This town requires its teacher to be above reproach, a model of conventional virtue. Your friendship with the Faulkners has created division in our community at a time when unity is essential for progress. If I may, Mr. Chairman, Matthew Faulkner's voice rose from behind Vivian, calm but carrying authority despite his youth. The board recognizes Matthew Faulkner, Chester said, clearly displeased by the interruption but unable to refuse without appearing petty. Matthew stood, his posture straight despite the lingering discomfort of his healing ribs. Mr. Chairman, board members, citizens of Stillwater, Miss Zimmerman has spoken eloquently about her professional commitment to this community. I would like to address the personal aspect of this discussion. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Vivian with unmistakable affection. The concern appears to be that Miss Zimmerman's association with Cross Creek Ranch somehow compromises her standing as a model for Stillwater's children. I submit that nothing could be further from the truth. Her compassion in assisting during my recovery, her intellectual contributions to our library project, her unwavering dedication to educational excellence, these qualities exemplify precisely the values we should wish our children to emulate. Several audience members nodded agreement. Matthew continued, his voice gaining strength. However, to remove any shadow of impropriety from future associations, I am pleased to announce that Miss Zimmerman has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. We intend to wed before Christmas, with the blessing of my uncle and, we hope, this community. The announcement caused a sensation. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few scattered claps erupted throughout the hall. Chester's face flushed dark red, while several board members exchanged significant glances. Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks. She and Matthew had planned to announce their engagement after the board meeting, regardless of outcome. His decision to reveal it now was unexpected but strategically perfect. It transformed the narrative from potential scandal to romantic culmination. Chester struggled visibly to regain control of the proceedings. While we congratulate Miss Zimmerman on her engagement, the fact remains that her conduct prior to this announcement remains at issue. Before he could continue, one of the board members, Mr. Jenkins, the postmaster, cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, Mr. Chairman, but it seems to me we're making a mountain of a molehill here. If Miss Zimmerman and young Mr. Faulkner are to be married, their prior association takes on a different character entirely. Courtship, we'd call it. Perfectly respectable, especially with the elder Mr. Faulkner and Mrs. Rodriguez present. He looked around at his fellow board members. I move we dismiss this matter and proceed to substantive business, like the school term extension, which affects every family in this community. I second the motion, called another board member, a merchant whose children attended Vivian's school. Chester could barely contain his frustration. The motion requires a vote, all in favor of dismissing the conduct inquiry against Miss Zimmerman. 4 of the 5 board members raised their hands, only Chester abstained. Motion carries, he announced tersely. The inquiry is dismissed. Relief washed through Vivian, though she maintained her composed expression. The most immediate threat had passed, but the larger issue, the school term extension, remained. Moving to the next agenda item, Chester continued, his tone clipped. The proposed extension of the school term by 2 months annually. The chair recommends against this extension due to financial constraints and the seasonal labor needs of our agricultural community. Again, Jim Faulkner's voice rose from the audience. Mr. Chairman, if financial concerns are paramount, I would like to pledge an annual contribution of $500 specifically designated for the extended term. This would cover the teacher's salary and necessary supplies, without additional burden on the town budget. The offer, substantial by frontier standards, created another stir in the hall. Chester's expression grew increasingly thunderous, while Mr. Faulkner's generosity is noted. The labor issue remains. Many families require their children's assistance during planting and harvest. At this, several parents rose to speak in favor of the extension, citing the long-term benefits of education over short-term labor advantages. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with passionate arguments from both sides. Finally, Chester called for a vote, all in favor of extending the school term by 2 months annually, contingent on Mr. Faulkner's financial support. The same 4 board members who had supported Vivian earlier raised their hands. Chester's jaw clenched visibly as he announced, "Motion carries. The school term will be extended beginning next academic year." The victory was complete. As the meeting adjourned, community members surrounded Vivian, Matthew, and Jim with congratulations both on the engagement and the educational advancement. Even those who had opposed the extension seemed mollified by Jim's financial commitment, which removed their primary practical objection. Chester Hollingsworth departed without speaking to anyone, his usual commanding presence diminished by the evening's defeats. Later, as Matthew walked Vivian home through the quiet streets, the full impact of the night's events began to register. "We did it," she said softly. "Both battles won." Matthew squeezed her hand gently. "Your battles, perhaps. I merely provided tactical support." "That's not true," Vivian countered. "The engagement announcement was masterful timing, and your uncle's financial pledge was clearly planned in advance." "Faulkners believe in preparing for all contingencies," Matthew admitted with a smile. "Though I should confess something, Uncle Jim's pledge wasn't entirely selfless. He sees the school as essential to Stillwater's future development, which in turn affects Cross Creek's prosperity. Educated communities attract businesses, professionals, cultural amenities, all of which increase land values and quality of life." Vivian laughed softly. "Your uncle is a remarkable blend of idealist and pragmatist." "A balance I hope to achieve myself someday," Matthew said as they reached her cottage. "With your help." They paused on her porch, the night quiet around them. Matthew took both her hands in his expression serious despite the evening's victories. "Are you certain about this, Vivian? Marriage life at Cross Creek, partnership with a Faulkner, it won't always be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "But yes, I'm certain. Not because it's convenient or expected or proper, but because it's right. Because together we can build something meaningful for ourselves, for Stillwater, for the future we both envision." Matthew's smile in response held all the warmth and promise of that shared vision. "Then we begin that future tonight," he said softly, drawing her closer. "With this community's blessing, unexpected as that might have seemed a few hours ago." Their kiss beneath the porch light felt like a covenant, not just between man and woman, but between kindred spirits who had recognized in each other the qualities they most valued. Intelligence, principle, the courage to stand for a better world than the one they had inherited. In the weeks that followed, Stillwater buzzed with preparations for the upcoming nuptials. The engagement transformed Vivian's position in the community. Those who had whispered about her Cross Creek visits now spoke admiringly of the romance. Chester Hollingsworth, recognizing his defeat, retreated to his ranch outside town, his influence temporarily diminished. Jim Faulkner threw himself into wedding preparations with surprising enthusiasm, offering Cross Creek as the venue and insisting on providing a celebration worthy of the occasion. Mrs. Rodriguez supervised the cleaning and decoration of the ranch house, while Matthew divided his time between ranch duties and finalizing plans for the lending library's launch, scheduled for January. Vivian continued teaching, but now with the school term extension secured and her position strengthened by community support. Her evening literacy classes, once controversial, gained new participants and even tentative approval from the town council. The wedding itself, held the weekend before Christmas, drew nearly the entire population of Stillwater. The Cross Creek Ranch House, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, accommodated the ceremony indoors despite the winter chill. Vivian wore a gown of ivory silk, a gift from Jim Faulkner, who insisted his new niece should have something worthy of Philadelphia standards. As she stood before the assembled guests, Matthew's hands holding hers as they exchanged vows, Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking independence, determined to build a life defined by her own choices rather than others' expectations. She had found that independence, but also something she hadn't sought, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. The traditional wedding vow to obey had been omitted from their ceremony by mutual agreement, a small but significant departure from convention that symbolized their approach to marriage. Not hierarchy, but equality. Not subjugation, but collaboration. Not duty alone, but duty illuminated by deep affection and intellectual kinship. After the ceremony, as guests enjoyed the lavish reception Jim had arranged, Matthew drew Vivian away for a moment of privacy in the library, the room where their connection had first deepened into something more than friendship. "Happy Mrs. Faulkner?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. Deliriously, she confirmed, though she couldn't resist adding, "Though I'll be using Zimmerman Faulkner professionally. The children are accustomed to Miss Zimmerman, and continuity matters in education." Matthew laughed, the sound warm in the book-lined room. "I would expect nothing less. A hyphenated name for a life that bridges worlds, east and west, tradition and progress, personal fulfillment and community service." "Eloquently put," Vivian murmured, raising a hand to his cheek. "And accurate, though at this moment, I'm less concerned with symbolic meanings and more interested in beginning our life together." "A sentiment I share completely," Matthew assured her, drawing her closer. "Though we should return to our guests before Uncle Jim sends a search party." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of congratulations, dancing, and celebration. As evening fell, the newlyweds departed for the smaller house Jim had built for them on Cross Creek property, close enough for daily interaction with the main ranch, yet separate enough to establish their own household. The house itself reflected their partnership, a spacious library that doubled as Matthew's law office, a dedicated schoolroom where Vivian could tutor advanced students and conduct special classes, comfortable living areas designed for both practicality and beauty. That night, as they stood together looking out at the stars from their bedroom window, Matthew wrapped his arms around Vivian from behind, his chin resting lightly on her head. "When I came to Cross Creek, I thought it was temporary," he reflected quietly, "a family obligation to fulfill before returning to my real life in St. Louis." "And now," Vivian asked, leaning back against his chest. "Now I understand that life isn't something you return to, it's something you build day by day, choice by choice." His arms tightened gently around her. "I'm grateful beyond words that you chose to build yours with mine." Vivian turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who had seen her mind before her face, who had valued her thoughts as much as her presence, who had offered partnership instead of possession. "The wisest choice I ever made," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to seal the promise with a kiss. Outside their window, the vast Texas sky spread like possibility itself, boundless, challenging, beautiful in its wild potential. Inside, they had created something equally vast yet infinitely more intimate, a shared vision, a mutual respect, a love founded not on fleeting passion, but on enduring recognition of each other's essential worth. In a land where survival often demanded compromise, they had refused to compromise on what mattered most, the freedom to be fully themselves together, and in that freedom, they had found the truest meaning of home.